I call on Eric Roy to make his valedictory statement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I begin with an immortal quote from Ecclesiastes chapter 3, which says, "There is a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens, a time to be born, a time to die, and a time to uproot." And so it is that our family is in this season of uprooting and finding some new challenges. I've often said that politics is a little bit like a crayfish pot. It takes a bit of energy to find the opening and to get in, but it's even harder to get out, and it's somewhat more difficult to get out undamaged. Whether I'm undamaged or not is for others to choose, but certainly for myself I can report I've learnt a lot, I've grown a lot, and I've made some really great friends. 2014 is a significant and pivotal year in our family. But in life's calendar, there have been other pivotal years, and I guess this started in another very pivotal year, 1972. Four things happened that were kind of loosely connected. I got married. Norm Kirk government swept to power. I bought a tractor, David Brown 990, white model, and I joined the National Party. The connection was that the tractor salesman was incensed that Labor had the right after 4 years of National to assume the Treasury benches, and he was able to persuade me with my new responsibilities of a David Brown 990 white model and a new wife that I should join the National Party. Little did I know that that course would set me on a course which I actually ended up here. I can now report that the David Brown is, to give it a technical term, munted. The membership of the National Party has been an interesting ride, but the real winner of that year was certainly the marriage. And I thought, in order to, you just stand here on your valedictory and you've got an absolute montage of thoughts about what you could do, and I thought I might give out a few awards. Now, I would say these are rhetorical and not material. So my first award goes to Elizabeth, who has been my most valued and energetic supporter. Elizabeth has a saying that behind every great man there is a great behind. And I'm not one to disagree with Elizabeth. At this time, I would also certainly like to thank my parliamentary team of Susie, Michelle, Paddy and Pauline. And I need to also acknowledge my business managers, Felicity, Stephen and Terry, who run my Tiana, or our Tiana operation, who've uncomplainingly kept things on an even keel. I could spend some 10 minutes naming, identifying and extolling a number of people who have assisted me. Suffice to say, in the confines of time, I just want to acknowledge people in a variety of communities, committees and roles who have been generous in their support, help and advice, and who have been very beneficial to my time here. It used to be that 21 years was the age of majority, and you got the key to the door. I joined the party in 1972. 21 years later, in 1993, I had the key of the door, and I came to Parliament. Since then, I've represented two electorates, had 2 terms on the list. I've been in Parliament, out of Parliament, back in Parliament. I've been in government, out of government and back in government. It's 21 years since 1993. I've got the key of the door. I'm leaving. One shouldn't try and interpret any reason for that. It's just a time to uproot and take some new challenges. It may have a lot to do that I want to leave this place before I'm subsumed into the 4th stage of manhood. If you're not familiar with that, stage 1, you believe in Santa Claus. Stage 2, you don't believe in Santa Claus. Stage 3, you are Santa Claus. Stage 4, you look like Santa Claus. But it's great. With my valedictory speech, there were 3 generations of Roys in the gallery. Today there are 3 generations of Roys again, but they're different generations. And so it's good to be able to do this amongst family and friends. Each one of us comes to Parliament with representing a kind of matrix of various things that we've been involved with. Certainly for me, a variety of community groups and activities across a wide range of organisations, a background in agriculture and farming, a strong sense of Christian values that were steeped in Presbyterianism, and I love the outdoors, which many people know. I've got a bit of a passion for hunting, and it wasn't very long before Bill English gave me the brand, "This is the Christian who kills." If I was to give an award for the most hectic time in Parliament, it would certainly be in my first year, in the first term of 93-96. Well, inside a year, because of a transgression of John Honey Carter, I was a junior whip. As we neared the first MMP election, with the advent of opportunities that might persist in places other than the various parties that exist, we had the formation of a number of parties and erosion out of our backbench. The formation of United Future, Rock, and also the Conservatives. So I ended up as a junior whip with a backbench of 13 people to run select committees. And it was at that time that as a systems person, I created a number of mechanisms to actually know where people were and what they were doing, and that certainly stood as a mechanism that whips used for some time. I'm not sure if it's still used. I also had to have an overlay of cabinet committees, the agendas of when various ministers were involved in those committees, so that I could pull people in and man select committees. And over that period of about 18 months, when I had those numbers to work with, never lost a vote in a select committee. It's interesting that during that time we lost 5 votes in the House. And I think, in a way, we think that the world will fall down when that happens. I would predict that under MMP that will happen again, and we ought not to get too serious about that sort of thing happening. So why I say it was so hectic, that while I was busy as whip, I was also a select committee chair. And I ran the primary production select committee largely just with myself on one side, and the biggest thing we did in that time was a total rewrite of the Fisheries Act. This was a paradigm shift away from the old to a new sustainable process, giving property rights, quota management, and a whole lot of issues that had never been done anywhere else in the world. Whilst I wasn't the architect of that bill, our committee was certainly tasked with making it work and making a number of substantial changes that we put into the bill. It was about 19 months' work. And so it was that we finished, well, before we actually got there, I did something quite interesting. We were kind of bound up and couldn't find a way through the maze of submissions and advice and contradictions that were about. So as a committee, we put out a position paper, and I called in all the parties who are highly polarised and impressed upon them what Chatham House rules were. Then presented a position paper and threatened them with all kinds of things that probably didn't exist in standing orders if they broke ranks. You've got to remember that in that environment there were sort of the eco groups represented by Greenpeace, commercial fishing on the other side, Maori customary, recreational, and we put out what we thought were ways forward on deeming, setting of TACC, and a whole lot of things that we just couldn't find our way through. Everybody held to the Chatham House rules, and on the basis of equal screaming, we made some decisions that were put in the bill. The bill came back to the House about exactly the same time in the political cycle as we are now, as we were closing out for 1996. Then, putting on my whip's hat, I was able to persuade the House that a 550-page bill could be taken as one question in 15 minutes in the House and committee, and then dealt with forthwith in another 20 minutes in the third reading. Yeah, it's kind of interesting that 18 years on, those substantive things that were put in have not been changed. But of interest further is last month a report was put out of an audit on 53 different fishing countries' fishing systems around the world, and New Zealand came out best managed, most sustainable. So if I was wanting, I can't give myself an award, but I certainly give myself a tick for what we did on fishing. That was quite an extraordinary period of time. The following year, the award for greatest adversary appeared. It occurred quite simply one night. I couldn't eat my tea, and later that evening I was walking up Glenmore Street and I collapsed. Sometime later, and I'm not sure when, a car picked me up and took me to my flat. That was Thursday night. That was Monday before I could get to the doctor. He pushed and prodded and then got me scanned forthwith. And they found that I had lumps inside me as big as footballs, as my entire lymph system was taken over by an aggressive lymphoma. The oncologist informed me I had a 20% chance of getting through it, which is kind of a code for, are your insurance premiums up to date? They opened me up and then closed me up and said there was nothing they could do. And so I went home, and I'm sitting there on, this is Wednesday, and so the award for the most surreal telephone conversation I've ever had in my life went something like this. Here I am sitting at home internalising some reasonably significant issues. The phone goes, ring, ring. Hello, this is Eric. This is Murray McCulley. I think, goodness me, the all-knowing Black Knight has heard about my predicament, and he cares. What's on your mind, Murray? I have to give a speech in Invercargill on Friday. It's July, and I've got a very bad cold. I don't think I should be going to Invercargill on Friday. Can you do it for me? Murray, do you think I really should be doing this? I'm sorry to hear about your cold, but I'm dying of cancer. Long pause. Ha, I'll send you the notes. Much is often said about the dog-eat-dog bear pit of this place. It's certainly my experience that there are genuine people in here who I have a great deal of admiration across the House. To give you an example of that, when I was in this battle, the first two MPs through my door at my farm were Damien O'Connor and Jim Sutton. And afterwards there were numerous acts of kindness and areas of support that really were a big part of the fight that I was in. Some of it more helpful than others. Some of it made me smile. Like the wonderful words of support from H.V. Ross Robertson. You'll be right, mate. Big, strong bloke like you, you'll be right. But you are lucky. If it's in your lymph, you're buggered, you know. So Ross gets the award for the best or worst backhanded compliment. In order to sort of truncate the whole story about the cancer, let me just say that it's a small part in a book that I've almost written called Notes to the Grandchildren that will be available at all good booksellers presently. There are two ongoing repercussions from this event of a brush with death, and they're not unique to me, but they have impacted me. One is that when you go through medical trauma, your senses kind of get mucked around emotionally. Don't understand it, but I knew it had happened to me when I found myself crying when Nemo got lost. The second one is you have an increased sense of your own mortality, and you're doing all this self-assessment and appraisal about what you're doing, how you're doing it, and where you're doing it, and whether it's the right things, and that can be a bit of an insomniacal monkey on your back. But after an absence from Parliament, I came back and was invited to take a role as a presiding officer. It's quite a simple job in principle, protecting the rights of the minority and ensuring the will of the majority, but of course it all takes place in an environment of wounding, damaging, getting credibility for yourself, and there's layers of passion and all sorts of things come in there. That's what makes it interesting. I think, in a way of reflectively, there's been a bit of a change since MMP. And the battle now is more party to party, because of course that's the important vote. And we've changed some things we do. When I came in here, general debates were principally opportunities for individuals to raise matters of concern in their own electorate elsewhere. It's now largely, for most parties, a themed debate, and I think we're not as well served by that. Is there an issue for change? I believe there is, and I have for some time, and I have an increasing feeling that we should do this, and that is make all third reading votes a personal vote. Note well, I'm saying personal vote, not free vote. I think increasingly there's some isolation and dislocation by members in this House from the actual meaning of voting, and we see when a vote comes along, sometimes the groupings left and right advise the minor parties what they're doing. We're seeing increasing times when there is a redress sought to either amend the vote or to record in the record of the House what is actually was the intention. And even more recently, we're seeing the veracity of proxies challenged by points of order or by interjection. And I don't think that looks too credible in the eyes of the public. It's not what they expect from their representatives in the highest course in the land. Now, I do realise that there would be a time factor involved in actually doing this. I think the Business Committee could think about how that might be done. One suggestion would be to have any third reading votes immediately after question time the following day, or even one more extended hour in a session of a parliament would cover for any of that time that has been taken up in that personal vote situation. One of the greatest disciplines about being a presiding officer is curtailing response. Sometimes you people, as you get involved in debate, I'm just dying to respond into a debate and I haven't been able to do that. The other thing is curtailing the desire to actually respond with an interjection at times. That has been so hard. And in an emergency, I turn to my right-hand man, Roland Todd, and say, Rolly, this is how it works, and tell him. Roland always had a 3-word response that never changed. Is that so? Thank you, Roland. The Cruellest Barb Award goes to an occurrence that occurred outside Parliament. I was going to give a speech at a field day in Palmerston North, and the best app on my BlackBerry couldn't find the Memorial Hall. I saw this guy in a dirty ute with a tweed jacket, not that he's got to be going there, so I asked him where the Memorial Hall was. And he told me, and then I looked at my watch because I was the opening shot, and he said, look, there's no need to worry, they've got a boring old fart from Wellington opening it up. And that's the cruellest barb. Old fart yet, but boring. Let me just conclude with a couple of issues that I think it would be remiss of me, because they're issues which I have as probably my greatest concerns. The first is the sort of ongoing inability of a number of New Zealand citizens to make sensible decisions in relation to their own conduct. And I made some comments about this on my maiden address. Let me give you some examples. On the 16th of January this year in Golden Bay, hundreds of people had spent 3 nights trying to stop some pilot whales from beaching themselves. So inherently there's good in all of us. On the 16th of January this year, same day, Mrs. Pravit Singh in Papatoetoe was attacked by 2 assailants, and in a crowd of hundreds of people she called for help. No one went. Worse than that, when she escaped and started to flee, some of the onlookers herded her back to the assailants. There is something inherently wrong with a society that actually can't make proper and sensible decisions. And it's kind of my view that we've stepped away from reference points that enable us to actually do that. We used to be solidly grounded into Judeo-Christian values, and that kind of worked for us. Now, we've never had the debate about what we put in our place, if we actually want to move away from that. I do acknowledge that it is not the role of this Parliament in any way to be faith promoters, and there should be that separation between religion and politics. But this is where I think it does transect. When we deal with issues of conscience, how do we actually make those decisions? When we're on the big issues like euthanasia or trading in alcohol or abortion or any of those issues, do we do it out of convenience, fairness, populism, or do we have a basis on choosing right and wrong, and what sort of a message are we actually sending to the wider community? The last point that is a big concern to me would be the award for the biggest lesson that I've learned. Weekly, well, let me reference it a wee bit for a start. Some of you will know that in 1967 I did some volunteer service. I went to Vanuatu, and there I interestingly learned about cargo cults. What are cargo cults? Cargo in Bislamara's possessions. A phone would be cargo. anything that you have. And what happened is that as these people were that lived there and had lived idyllically for a long time were contaminated by a lot of people that came in with a whole lot of cargo, they got to thinking, how do we get this? During the Second World War, was probably the advent of most of these. And on the island of Tanna, there is a cargo cult called the John Frum movement. One night in Tanna, as people were talking about how they could get the cargo, a man in a splendiferous uniform arrived and pulled a big scam. He said, give me your money and I shall return with money for you, but these are the things you need to do to worship. I am John from America, hence the John Frum movement. He took their money and left. 4 generations on, people on Tanna are still waiting. And we laugh and think that's kind of quaint. But in reality, the biggest lesson for me is that cargo cults are very much a part of every part of society. And weekly I have people saying to me, why doesn't the government do this? Why don't we do this? And as people have an expectation that there is some other way that they can actually get cargo. I absolutely applaud what Paula Bennett is doing, showing people who have gotten into a dependency mould that there are other pathways. And here's the real rub, though, as we get into an election over the last 5 or 6 weeks and parties are really, really keen to retain power or earn power, that we could use the equity of this country to promise cargo that might be a reward in the ballot box. And I think that we need to ponder really the motive of how we actually do all of those things coming up through the election. And I won't be here, so I just make that little call now. Mr. Speaker, in spite of much encouragement, I've decided not to sing a waiata at this point. However, I have written a valedictory poem, which is quite short. It's called October, with apologies to A.B. Patterson. There was movement up in Wally, for the word had passed around that a new parliament was underway. They'd gathered from electorates new faces to abound, and all the cracks had gathered to the fray. All the tried and noted members from electorates near and far had gathered to the parley for the fight. For the members love hard talking where the nation's fortunes lie, and the MPs sniff the battle with delight. But in a quiet mountain valley, there's a stream with crystal flow. A man with fly rod ready, a trout to be his foe, recalled his journey forays and the days of Wellington. He reflected for a moment in times, in-house and so, of democracy and friendships, the privilege to serve, of bells and whips and caucus, select committees too, of standing order, speakers' rulings, points of order. He clears his thought, a trout rises, solitude returns, I bid you adieu.
I call on Shane Arden to make his valedictory statement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.